The fjord lay in silence before the dawn, a vast mirror of steel-gray water stretching between cliffs dark with pine. Mist curled upon its surface, rising like breath from the throat of giants, veiling the rocky shores in shifting shrouds. The sky bore the faintest pallor of approaching light. Yet the stars still glimmered cold, their fire dim against the immensity of night's retreat. The land itself seemed to wait, hushed, as though holding its breath for the coming day. Along the shore crouched the village, timbered halls and turf-roofed huts clanging close to one another as though for warmth against the northern wind. Curled thin from holes in the thatches, ghostly trails drifting into the pale sky. The scent of wood smoke and salt, of damp wool and dried fish, lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of centuries of toil. Dogs stirred restlessly, their noses twitching toward the faint glimmer upon the horizon, while the cocks crowed, their cries piercing the hush. Within the longhouse's life began to stir. A woman, hair braided and bound with a strip of linen, bent over the hearth, her breath coaxing flame from last night's embers. Sparks leaped, firewood caught, and warmth began to creep through the smoky hall. The air was thick with the smell of ash and sweat-soaked hides that hung from the rafters, yet to the people it was the smell of home, of survival. Children stirred upon their straw-stuffed mattresses, scratching at flea bites, murmuring in half-sleep. A babe whimpered, and the mother hushed it with a low song, her voice old as the fjord itself. The men rose slowly, their movements heavy with the memory of yesterday's toil. Rough tunics of wool, patched and stiff, were pulled over broad shoulders. Belts of leather cinched waists, knives hung at hips. Boots were drawn on, still damp from melted snow. Faces were weathered, beards tangled, eyes shadowed by fatigue, yet there was no complaint, for complaint was wasted breath. The land demanded silence and strength. They stepped out into the chill air, their breath steaming, their eyes scanning the pale edge of sky. The fjord glimmered, restless beneath the mist. Beyond it lay the endless sea, vast and unknowable, the path of fortune and death. But for now, their eyes turned to fields stony and thin, two herds restless in their pens, two nets hung upon poles. Survival was here, not beyond. The day began with tasks familiar as heartbeat. Some men shouldered axes and strode into the forest, their dogs at heel. Two fell pine and oak to gather fuel against the coming winter. The thud of axe upon wood echoed through the valley, each strike a prayer of endurance. Others went to the boats drawn up on the shore, their hulls heavy with frost. Nets were checked, knots retied, weights fastened, the smell of tar and hemp thick upon hands. Soon the boats were shoved into the dark water, oars biting, their silhouettes swallowed by mist as they vanished toward deeper currents where fish waited in silence. Upon the slopes above the fjord, women moved through pens of sheep and goats. Their cloaks were heavy with dew, their hands red with cold as they milked beasts, their voices murmuring softly. Milk-filled wooden pails, carried back to halls where curds would be pressed. Butter churned, cheese formed and stored for harsher months. Others bent to gardens, gathering cabbages, turnips, and onions from soil stony and reluctant, coaxed into life by calloused hands. Within the longhouse, the hearth now blazed, and upon it hung an iron cauldron filled with porridge of barley, thickened with dried berries, flavored with a pinch of salt. Children crowded close, their cheeks flushed with heat, their eyes bright with hunger. Bread dark with rye was sliced, slabs of butter spread thin, a little honey poured sparingly for the youngest. Wooden bowls were filled, spoons carved from bone passed from hand to hand. This was not feast, but sustenance, not joy, but necessity. Yet even here, laughter rose as children jostled and mothers scolded gently, for life was more than toil. It was warmth shared. The chieftain's hall stood larger than the rest, its roof higher, its beams thicker, its walls adorned with shields captured from raids. Inside, the hearth was broader, the benches longer, the air heavier with smoke and mead. The chieftain rose later than his thralls, his cloak lined with fur, his arm ring heavy with silver. He stretched, his breath rumbling like a bear's, and called for bread and ale. His household bustled to serve him, slaves carrying buckets, women bringing loaves, warriors sharpening axes by firelight. His word was law, his wealth the measure of all. Yet even he was bound by the land, for hunger and cold spared none, not even lords. As the sun at last broke above the cliffs, its light poured like molten gold upon the fjord. The water shone, the mist lifted, and the world stirred fully to life. Men's shouts echoed across fields, axes rang through forests, dogs barked, gulls screamed above the tide. The air was sharp, bright with salt and pine, alive with the clamor of survival, and yet, beneath the labor of day, a deeper pulse beat within the people. For they were not merely farmers or fishers, not merely men and women bent to earth. They were Vikings, and within their veins ran the blood of wanderers and warriors. The sea was never far from thought, the gods never far from memory. Odin watched from his high seat, ravens circling the skies. Thor's hammer thundered in storms, Freya's hand blessed fertility and love. Loki's laughter whispered mischief in firelight. Each dawn was more than a beginning, it was a reminder. To rise was to struggle, to eat was to fight, to labor was to live, and to live was to earn a place in story, whether upon earth or in the halls of Valhalla. The fjord echoed with their voices, their oars, their axes. Smoke rose from halls, sails waited upon masts, sagas lingered upon tongues. Dawn had come to the north, and with it began the unending cycle of blood, sea, and story. The village did not wake all at once, but in waves, as though the land itself exhaled in slow breath. A boy darted from his family's hall, hair wild, eyes bright with mischief. In his hand he clutched a stick carved to resemble a spear, its point blunted, its shaft rough with splinters. He shouted as though leading warriors, chasing a goose that hissed and flapped in protest. Other children followed, their laughter high and sharp, scattering hens and startling the dogs. They played at battle, mimicking the cries they had heard from fathers who had once gone raiding. In their games lay prophecy, for boys would grow into warriors, girls into women who bore them. And each life would repeat the song of the North. Older children carried burdens instead of games. A girl scarcely 10 winters old trudged toward the stream with a wooden pail clutched in both hands, its weight sloshing against her thin arms. Her hair was bound in a braid, her dress patched at elbows, her feet bare against the stones. She did not laugh as the younger ones did, for her thoughts were bent on not spilling water on reaching hearth before her mother's voice scolded her. Childhood was brief, and toil claimed her early, shaping her into the rhythm of womanhood. Along, the beach nets were hauled, heavy with herring glistening like silver coins. Men strained, muscles taut, their shouts mingling with the cries of gulls. Fish writhed, their scales flashing in the light, until knives cut quick and merciless, spilling entrails into buckets. The smell of salt and blood filled the air, thick and briny, a perfume of survival. Children carried baskets of fish to huts where women salted and laid them upon racks, smoke rising as fires consumed driftwood. The work was endless, the sea generous yet demanding, its gifts bound always to sweat and blade. In the forest, hunters moved like shadows. Their cloaks were mottled with earth, their boots muffled upon moss. They carried bows strung with sinew, arrows tipped with iron. A stag lifted its head among birches, ears twitching, nostrils wide. The hunters froze, breath caught, fingers trembling upon bowstrings. Then the twang, the hiss, the thud of impact. The stag leapt, staggered, fell. They approached with reverence, touching its flank, whispering words of thanks to the gods. Blood spilled upon the soil was offering as much as sustenance, and they bore it back upon poles. Their bodies bent beneath its weight, but their hearts steady with pride. In the halls, women's work wove silently. A loom stood tall, threads stretched, taut as harpstrings, a shuttle sliding back and forth in practiced hands. Wool spun by younger girls was dyed in vats of root and bark, colors of earth and sea-deep browns, faded greens, dull blues. Cloth grew beneath fingers, destined for tunics, cloaks, sails. The loom sang with rhythm as steady as the plow, or the hammer, binding family and clan and fabric both, literal and unseen. The sound of the forge broke the stillness of morning with sharp rhythm. The smith, his arms corded with muscle, hammered glowing iron upon an anvil. Sparks leapt, showering the darkened hut with fleeting stars. His apprentice pumped the bellows, feeding flame until it roared, devouring charcoal, making iron yield to shape. Axes took form beneath the hammer, their edges ground sharp upon wet stones. Nails were forged, hinges fashioned, spearheads shaped. The smith sweated, grunted, cursed when iron cracked, but his eyes shone with pride. For in his craft lay not only survival, but destiny, weapons that would drink blood, tools that would build ships, nails that would hold planks against the sea's fury. Beyond toil lay faith. At the edge of the village, upon a rocky rise, a seeress stood cloaked in furs, her staff carved with runes. Ravens wheeled above her, their cries harsh and hollow. She cast bones upon the ground, their clatter sharp against stone, and whispered in tongues half forgotten. The villagers watched from afar, uneasy, for the Volva's words carried weight. Her prophecies spoke of storms and seasons, of life and death, of battles not yet fought. Some feared her, others revered her, yet all listened. For in a land where frost could kill, where seas could swallow, where enemies could strike without warning, a Legevin shadowed was precious. The chieftain strode among his people, his cloak heavy with bare fur, his arm ring gleaming. His voice boomed, calling men to council. They gathered in the hall, warriors with axes across their knees, elders with hands trembling upon staffs. Mead was poured into horns, bread broken and shared, and talk began. Fields, herds, timber, raids all were weighed. Disputes were settled by oath or fine, challenges met with duel, if pride demanded. The chieftain's word carried weight, but he was no king. He ruled by strength, by gift, by honor. If he faltered, men would turn, for loyalty was bound not by crown but by worth. As the sun climbed higher, its light gilded the fjord, until water gleamed like polished steel. Boats rocked gently against shore, their dragon heads snarling silently. Shields hung along their sides, oars rested within. They were not yet summoned, not yet set upon the sea, but their presence was promise. The villagers cast glances toward them, some with pride, others with dread. For the sea was both gift and grave, and every raid carried both glory and death. By midday the village pulsed with life. Children carried wood to hearths, women churned butter in tall wooden barrels, men repaired roofs with sod and timber. Dogs barked, chasing rats from granaries, cats slunk after birds. Smoke rose thick and steady, mingling with the cries of gulls. The fjord reflected all, its surface bright, its depths dark. The day stretched ahead, full of toil and promise. Yet even in the rhythm of survival, the people felt beneath their feet the pulse of destiny. For they were not merely dwellers of huts, tillers of soil, fishers of fjords. They were heirs to sagas, children of Odin and Thor, wanderers of seas, wielders of axes, singers of song. Dawn was both beginning and echo, a thread woven into the endless cloth of story, and so the fjord awoke fully. Its shores alive with sweat, its waters alive with oars, its skies alive with ravens. The north had stirred, and in its stirring lay the first breath of Saga. The sun rose higher now, a pale fire upon the horizon, spilling long fingers of light across the ridges of mountains capped with snow. The fjord glistened like a blade freshly honed, sharp, and unforgiving, yet dazzling in its brilliance. The people of the village moved as though drawn by the same tide, each to their duty, each bound by necessity. Upon the far shore, a group of boys ran, shouting, their voices carrying across water clear and cold. They hurled stones at the ice lingering. In shaded pools, their laughter ringing like the clash of steel. One boy stumbled, blood streaking his knee, but he rose without a cry, grinning with the ferocity of youth. Already he bore the spirit of warrior, for pain was not enemy, but teacher, and wounds were the ink with which manhood was written. Near the hall, old men sat upon logs, their cloaks wrapped tightly about stooped shoulders. They smoked pipes carved from horn, their eyes dim yet watchful. They muttered of winters past, of harvests lost, of raids won, of kinsmen dead. Their words carried weight, though their hands had grown too frail for axe or for memory was. As precious as iron, and the old bore memory like treasure, passing it to the young in tales half-whispered by Feuds at the water's edge. Women bent over tubs, scrubbing linen with hands red and raw. Their voices rose in song, weaving harmonies as steady as the tide. They sang of gods and seasons, of lost lovers and unborn sons, of sorrow turned to strength. Their songs were not mere music. They were thread-binding the village, reminding each ear that they were not alone in labor nor in pain. Children listened, imprinting verses upon memory, to be sung in their turn when years had bent them likewise. Further inland, smoke rose from a clearing where men burned stumps to open ground. For fields, the fire crackled, sparks drifting skyward, the smell of resin and char filling the air. Sweat dripped, muscles strained, curses mingled with laughter. They worked with the ferocity of those who knew that winter would not wait, that every tree felled, every patch of soil cleared, was one step between life and starvation. Their axes rang like bells of iron, tolling a hymn to survival. Above them, upon a rocky outcrop, the Valhalla Sirius lifted her arms to the sky. Ravens circled, their cries stark and piercing. She wore a cloak of dark feathers, her staff etched with runes that seemed to writhe in the morning light. She whispered to gods unseen, her voice carried upon winds sharp with salt. Some in the village turned their eyes away, fearful of the truths she might summon. Others crossed themselves in reverence, muttering prayers to Odin, to Freya, to whichever god might listen, for in her voice they heard both dread and promise, shadow and hope. As the morning wore on, the fjord itself seemed to awaken. Boats returned with nets heavy and glistening, men's voices raised in triumph as fish spilled like treasure upon the shore. Children rushed to help, carrying baskets, tripping and laughing. The women salted and hung the catch, their movements swift, practiced, efficient. Smoke from fires thickened, mingling with mist, turning the air into shifting veils through which the village moved like figures in Saga. The chieftain's hall grew louder, its doors flung open, the sound of debate rolling forth like thunder. Men gestured, their hands striking the air, their voices rough with passion. Talk of land, of cattle, of voyages filled the hall, decisions that would shape the village's fate. Mead horns were raised, oaths sworn upon rings of silver. Outside, warriors sharpened their axes, their eyes fixed upon the sea. As though hearing a call deeper than human voice, by midday the village pulsed with the full strength of life. The air smelled of pine smoke, salt, sweat, and fish. It rang with hammer, axe, and laughter. It shimmered with sunlight, striking upon water restless and deep. Every man, woman, and child bore a role, a burden, placed in the great weave. And yet beneath the ordinary lay the extraordinary. For though they worked soil, mended nets, churned butter, their hearts beat to a rhythm older than earth. The sagas of their ancestors whispered in blood. The gods watched from Asgard, their ravens and wolves roaming unseen. Fate itself, that web unbreakable, spun threads around each life, binding them to a story that would outlast flesh. Thus, dawn upon the fjord was no mere morning. It was the rising of a world harsh yet magnificent, cruel yet radiant, mortal yet touched by myth. Each ember lit upon hearth, each oar dipped into water. Each voice raised in song or curse was part of a greater chorus, the chorus of the North. Of lives lived upon the edge of hunger and hope, of men and women who stood unflinching beneath sky vast and pitiless. The day had only begun, yet already the saga unfolded. Its verses written in smoke and sweat, in steel and salt, the cries of children in the silence of gods. The fjord gleamed. The village stirred, the axes rang, and dawn gave way to day. And thus began another chapter in the endless saga of blood, sea, and story. The day unfurled across the fjord, its light stretching wide, gilding roofs of turf and timber, pouring warmth upon damp soil. Where dawn had roused the village into motion, morning now drew it fully into its rhythm, and the heartbeat of survival quickened. The fields lay beyond the clustered halls, patches of earth coaxed into grudging fertility by hands calloused and unrelenting. Stone walls marked their boundaries, low and rough, raised by generations who had lifted rock from soil with every furrow cut. The earth was thin, its skin stretched over bones of granite, yet it yielded barley and rye, oats and flax, enough to feed the village if seasons were kind and gods did not turn their faces away. Men walked those fields with plows bound to oxen. The beasts groaned, their shoulders straining against yokes, their breath clouding the air in white mist. The plows cut through earth with a sound like tearing cloth, soil rolling aside in clumps black and heavy. The men bent their weight to the task, muscles taut, voices urging beasts forward with low guttural calls. Behind them, the furrows stretched. In neat scars, straight lines etched into the skin of the land, signs of both toil and promise. Women followed in their wake, casting seed from baskets slung across their hips. The grains pattered against the earth like rain, falling into furrows dark and moist, swallowed by soil that might cradle or betray them. Each handful scattered was a prayer unspoken, a gamble cast upon fate. Children ran behind, stamping lightly, upon soil to cover seed, their bare feet pressing life into earth. Their laughter mingled with the calls of crows wheeling above, dark wings circling greedily, waiting to snatch the harvest before it could rise. Closer to the village, gardens thrived in patches between halls. Cabbages stood broad and green, turnips pushed their swollen roots into earth, onions lifted sharp stalks skyward. Women bent to weed, their hands quick, their backs unbending despite ache. Infants lay swaddled in baskets nearby, their cries rising above the buzz of bees. Older daughters fetched water from streams, poured it carefully, splashing it upon thirsty leaves. The gardens were not grand, yet in their leaves lay survival. A winter with full cellars meant life. A winter with empty jars meant graves dug. Into frozen soil, beyond the fields, the meadows stretched, rough grass waving in the northern breeze. Sheep grazed there, their wool thick and matted, their bells clinking as they moved. Goats leaped from rock to rock, their bleats sharp, their eyes bright with mischief. Cows stood heavy and patient, their udders swelling with milk. Boys drove them with sticks, whistling, shouting, laughing, though always watchful. For wolves prowled forests and hunger made them bold. The dogs ran with the herds, barking, teeth flashing, ready to defend their charges with blood if need be. The sound of scythes rang from the meadow where men cut hay. The long blades swished through grass, falling in heaps fragrant and green. Sweat poured, arms ached, but they labored on, for winter demanded fodder as much as grain. Without hay, beasts would starve when snow blanketed the world in silence. Each bundle gathered. Each cart filled was not only work, but salvation stored against frost. The air was alive with voices, men shouting from fields, women singing at looms, children squealing as they splashed in streams. The clang of smiths. Hammer rang steady, the hiss of quenched iron sharp, the crackle of hearths constant. Ravens cawed from the tree line, gulls screamed above fjord, dogs barked, goats bleated. It was a symphony of survival, each note harsh yet harmonious, each sound woven into the saga of day. In the longhouse the rhythm of craft continued. Women spun wool, their spindles worry, thread growing fine and strong between calloused fingers. Looms stood tall, cloth stretching like sails in mid-birth. Woven with patience, destined to clothe family and warriors alike, flax was spun into linen, soft and pale, dyed in vats of root and bark, colored in hues of earth and sea. A woman hummed as she worked, her voice low, her song an old one, telling of gods and fields, of battles fought long ago. Children listened, though their hands were busy with smaller tasks guarding wool, fetching water, carrying baskets. In such ways they learned, for labor was teacher as much as hunger. The chieftain's thralls bent to heavier toil. They carried timber from forest, stone from hillside, water from fjord. Their backs were bent, their clothes rough, their faces marked by scars of servitude. Some had been captured in raids, torn from homelands far to the south or east, now bound to this village until death or favor freed them. They labored silently, their tongues muttering in accents strange, yet their sweat mingled with that of freemen, for all work was needed. All lives were bound to the same fate if harvest failed by midday. The sun burned higher, though its warmth was never gentle in these lands. The light was sharp, the air crisp, the shadows of mountains falling long upon fields. Men wiped brows with sleeves, drank from horns of water or ale, then bent again to plows and scythes. Women fed children bread and cheese, milked cows in shaded pens, churned butter in tall barrels. The churns thudded rhythmically, the butter forming in clumps pale and precious, to be salted, stored, saved. The children's play grew rougher. They wrestled in the dust, their cries echoing, their bodies covered in sweat and grit. Wooden swords clashed, wooden shields splintered, their laughter fierce as they fought. The elders watched with approving eyes, for games were training, and training was prophecy. A boy who bore pain with a grin was destined for the shield wall. A girl who carried water without complaint was ready for hearth and kinship. In each act, life prepared them for roles etched deep by custom and by gods. The air grew thick with scent of earth turned, grass cut, bread baking, fish smoking. Flies buzzed, bees droned, birds shrieked. The fjords shimmered in sunlight, a mirror of sky restless with wind. From far across its surface came the faint cry of another boat. Men chanting as they rowed, the sound deep and rhythmic, echoing from cliffs. The village turned to listen, their eyes drawn to horizon. Two sails perhaps unseen, yet imagined. 4. Though the fields bound them, the sea called always, whispering of raids, of plunder, of sagas yet to be sung. The afternoon pressed on, labor unceasing, sweat falling, laughter mingling with curses. Yet beneath toil lay pride, for every furrow cut, every fish salted. Every cloth woven was not merely work, it was life secured, story continued, future promised. And so the village pulsed with strength. Its fields scarred yet fertile, its people weary yet unbroken. Each hand bore burden, each back bent, each heart endured. In this rhythm of soil and sweat, the day deepened, and the saga of the north wove another thread, strong and rough, into the endless cloth of blood. See. In story, the heart of the village beat not only in its fields and fjords, but in the forge, where fire and iron conspired to shape the destiny of men. From afar, the smithy was marked by smoke darker than hearth fire, rising in heavy columns, that smudged the clear sky. The air trembled with sound, the hammers clang upon anvil, the hiss of metal plunged into water, the deep roar of bellows feeding flame until it glowed like the breath of Muspelheim itself. The smith was a figure half feared, half feared. His arms were thick as oak branches, his chest bare beneath a leather apron blackened by years of soot. His beard was matted, his face streaked with ash, his eyes glinting in firelight like coals. Children dared not jest in his presence, for it was said the smith held power beyond mortal craft, his hammer strokes echoing those of the gods themselves. Did not Thor shape thunder with Mjolnir's strike? Did not dwarves in old tales forge blades that sang with magic? So, too, did the village whisper that the smith's hands bore fragments of that ancient art inside the forge. The air was suffocating, heavy with heat, smoke, and the sharp temps of metal. The fire roared in the hearth. Bellows groaned as apprentices pumped them, sweat pouring down their young bodies, muscles trembling with effort. Sparks leapt like stars each time the hammer fell, cascading in showers that died upon the packed earth floor. The anvil rang with every blow, a steady rhythm like a war drum, beating the shape of destiny into red-hot iron. The work was endless. Plowshares for fields, nails for timber, hinges for doors, but above all, weapons. Axes were shaped, their edges curved with deadly precision, their bodies polished until they gleamed silver-white. Swords too were forged, though rarer, for they demanded more time, more skill, more iron than most could afford. They were treasures, worn not by thralls or farmers, but by warriors whose names carried weight. The smith layered iron upon iron, folded it, hammered it, quenched it, tempered it. He tested the blade against bone, against wood, against stone. Only when it rang true did he release it, his pride bound to its edge. Spears were countless, their shafts of ash fitted with heads sharp and slender. Shields were bound with iron rims, their centers crowned with bosses hammered into shape. Helmets, conical and plain, were beaten upon the anvil, their bands riveted, their noses guarded. Each piece was more than tool. It was life, death, and honor. For a warrior without axe or shield was naked before gods and men alike. The sound of forging drew men as moths to flame. Warriors came to watch, their hands restless upon empty belts, their eyes gleaming as iron took form. They spoke little, yet their silence was heavy with desire. When the smith lifted a new forged axe, its edge catching firelight, a murmur passed among them like wind through pine. They saw in it their own strength, their own fury, their own hope for glory. Boys hovered near, daring glances at sparks that flew like stars. They longed to touch hammer, to feel weight of steel, to know the secret of shaping fire into weapon. The apprentices, scarcely older, bore their envy with pride, for their blisters were proof of place. Each scar was a step toward mastery, each burn a badge of learning. In time, they too would hold the hammer, their blows ringing out into the Saga of the North. The forge gave birth not only to weapons, but to ships. Nails fastened planks, rivets bound beams, iron tools carved dragon heads that would snarl at the PROW. The smell of tar and resin mingled with smoke. The creak of wood joined the clang of iron. Shipwrights bent their backs. Guided by smiths' work, shaping vessels that would carry men across seas, vast and merciless. Without iron, no ship would hold, no raid succeed, no saga be sung. And so the forge was more than place, it was the soul of the village, its fire a hearth for all. To the women, it gave hinges, needles, knives. To the men, it gave plowshares, axes, swords. To the children, it gave hope of one day bearing iron as their fathers did. To the gods, it gave offerings, for the first blood spilt upon a blade was often a goat's or a thrall's. Given in thanks for weapon strength, the smith himself was bound to none yet served all. He was honored with gifts of food, drink, and silver, yet feared, for his temper was as hot as his forge. It was said he could curse a blade, make it weak, brittle, treacherous. It was also said he could bless it, give it edge that bit deeper, sharper, truer. Men whispered his name with reverence, for in his hammer lay the line between survival and ruin. As the day wore on, the forge glowed like a second sun. The roar of fire did not fade, the hammer did not rest, the anvil did not fall silent. Sweat dripped, smoke curled, iron sang. From morning until dusk, the smith labored, each stroke writing a verse in the saga of his people. When at last he lifted his hammer and rested, the forge still glowed, embers red as blood, sparks drifting upward like souls of warriors bound for Valhalla. Men came forward, eyes hungry, hands eager, to claim what he had birthed. An axe passed from his grip to theirs was more than weapon, it was oath, promise, fate. Thus the forge stood eternal, its fire undying, its song unending. For as long as the North endured, as long as men sailed seas and sought glory, the hammer would fall, iron would yield, and the saga would continue in blood and flame. The land of the North was hard, its winters long, its summers fleeting, its seas merciless. Yet harsher still was the uncertainty of fate, for no man knew when storm, hunger, or enemy's blade might end him. In such a world, the gods were not distant phantoms, but constant presences. Their breath felt in wind, their voices heard in thunder, their will glimpsed in fire and bone. Faith was not quiet devotion, but covenant of blood, binding men to powers both fearsome and vast. At the edge of the village, upon a rise of stone blackened by countless fires, stood the sacred grove. Ancient oaks spread their limbs wide, their roots gripping earth like claws, their leaves whispering in winds cold and sharp. Within the grove a great stone altar rose, stained dark by centuries of offerings. Ravens perched upon its edges, there, black eyes glinting, their cries echoing as though mocking or affirming the rites below. Men said Odin's birds Hugin and Munin watched from such places, bearing men's deeds to the All-Father's hall on the morning of sacrifice. The villagers gathered, men, women, and children alike. They came clad in cloaks, their faces stern, their voices hushed. Warriors bore axes polished, shields upon their backs, for even before gods they carried iron. Women carried bowls of grain, loaves of bread, cups of mead. Children clung to mothers, their eyes wide, half with awe, half with fear. All assembled, for none could live apart from the will of the gods. At the altar stood the Gothi, the priest robed in white wool, his beard long, his staff carved with runes. His eyes were shadowed with the weight of visions, his voice deep as Ford. He lifted his hands, calling upon Odin, upon Thor, upon Freya, upon Ongir to the sea, upon all who watched from halls beyond sight. His chant rose like storm wind, words ancient as stone, carried from father to son, from seer to priest, across generations unbroken. The chosen beast was led forth, a goat, its horns gilded, its eyes rolling. It bleated as ropes pulled it toward altar, its hooves scrabbling against stone. The Gothi raised a knife of iron, its edge flashing in morning light. He spoke words of offering, of life given for life, of blood spilled to bind gods and men. Then, with swift stroke, he cut deep. Blood spilled warm and steaming, running down stone, soaking into earth dark and hungry. The goat shuddered, fell, stilled. Ravens shrieked, wings beating as they descended to feast. The Gothi dipped a branch of evergreen into blood, sprinkling it upon gathered folk. Drops spattered upon faces, upon cloaks, upon weapons. Each drop was blessing, shield against ill fate, promise of harvest, victory, or safe voyage. Men lifted heads proudly, women bowed in reverence, children shivered, yet dared not flee. For blood was life, and to be touched by it was to be bound to God's gaze. At times the sacrifice was not beast, but man. A thrall taken in raid bound, and trembling was led to altar. His cries rose, his pleas unheard, drowned by chanting. The knife flashed, blood poured, his soul sped to realms unseen. Some whispered such offerings pleased Odin most, for the All-Father himself had hung 9 nights upon Yggdrasil, pierced by spear, sacrificing himself to himself. What was a thrall's life compared to that of a god? When omens were sought, the Volva, the seeress, was summoned. Cloaked in furs, her staff bound with feathers and bones, she stepped into circle of firelight. Her eyes rolled white, her voice trembled with otherworldly cadence. She cast runes. Carved upon stone, their fall read as fate's handwriting. She spoke of winters harsh or mild, of raids successful or doomed, of deaths near at hand. Men listened, their faces grim. For though fate was unchangeable, to know was to prepare, to steel the heart, to sharpen the axe. Not all rites were solemn. At midsummer, fires blazed high upon hills, flames leaping into sky, smoke drifting to stars. Men and women danced around them, their shadows flickering, their voices raised in songs of joy and defiance. Mead flowed, laughter rang, bodies twined. In passion beneath moon, fertility was honored, earth blessed, gods thanked for light and warmth. Children leaped over embers, shrieking with glee, while elders muttered of years long past. In such nights, sorrow was forgotten, and the north itself seemed to smile. But always, death was near, and with it the promise of Valhalla, to fall in. Battle, axe in hand, shield unbroken, was highest fate. Then Valkyries would descend, maidens shining in armor, their steeds swift, their hands outstretched. They would bear warrior's soul to Odin's hall, where mead flowed without end, where tables groaned with feast, where comrades laughed and sang forever. To die otherwise by age, by sickness, by hunger was lesser end, soul wandering to hell's cold realm. Thus men sought battle, not shunning death, but embracing it. For in death lay glory eternal. Around fires at night skalds told of such fates. Their voices rang, their harps thrummed, their words weaving sagas of Sigurd, of Ragnar, of heroes long gone. Children listened wide-eyed, women smiled faintly, men nodded grimly. Each tale was both warning and promise, reminder that deeds outlived flesh, that memory was victory greater than gold. Thus faith wove itself through every act, every breath, every heartbeat. To eat was to thank gods, to fight was to honor them, to die was to join them. The village was no mere cluster of halls, was a temple beneath open sky, its fields altars, its fjord offering, its people's sacrifices living and willing. The gods were harsh, yet so was the land. And so the people mirrored, their deities, fierce, unyielding, merciless, yet bound by honor, bound by oath. Blood sealed their covenant, faith sustained their souls, and Saga carried their names beyond death. The fjord had long been cradle of the people, its waters a mirror by dawn, a battlefield by storm, a path into both fortune and death. Your men, born upon its shore, lived without hearing its call, for the sea was not merely horizon, but destiny itself. It lured with promise of fish, of plunder, of lands unbound, yet threatened always with storm and grave. To the Viking the sea was not friend, not foe, but fate. At the water's edge lay the ships, drawn up upon the shingle, their prows carved into snarling dragons, their hulls dark with tar, their planks bound tight with iron nails. Even in stillness, they seemed alive, their curved backs poised like beasts, eager to spring. Children ran between them, their hands tracing scales cut deep into wood, their eyes wide with awe. Talk. To them ships were more than timber, they were wings of clan and kin, wings that bore men beyond sight of shore, into Saga everlasting. The shipwrights worked without pause. Adzes bit into oak beams, saws rasped through pine, hammers rang as nails bit wood. Men bent planks over fire, steaming and pliant, then bound them into curve of hull. Tar bubbled in pots, thick and black, poured hot into seams until they gleamed. Ropes were twisted of hemp, sails woven of wool, dyed red and white, their squares vast as sky. The smell of resin, tar, smoke, and salt clung heavy. The forge's song joining with shipyard's clamor in harmony of craft. Each ship was child of many hands, but mothered by sea. Without God's blessing, no voyage would prosper. And so when a vessel was birthed, the people gathered. A goat was led, its eyes wide, its bleat sharp, and its throat was cut upon prow. Blood spilled down carved dragon's head, staining wood dark. The priests chanted, the women sang, the warriors lifted voices, and all watched as blood ran into waves. Thus ship was bound to sea, to fate, to gods. Only then could it carry men without wrath of storm. Preparation for voyage filled days with frenzy. Nets were mended, barrels filled with water and ale, sacks packed with dried fish and hard bread. Axes were sharpened, shields polished, spears bound in leather. Warriors oiled their mail, checked their helmets, tested the weight of sword. In hand, women stitched cloaks, sewed tunics, kissed sons and husbands, hiding tears behind stern words. Children clung to fathers' legs, begging for tales, promising to grow strong in their absence. The evening before departure, the hall blazed with firelight. Mead horns were passed, songs roared, stories of past voyages spilled forth like rivers. Old warriors spoke of Ireland's green hills, of Frankish towns plundered, of silver hoards hidden in monasteries. Younger men listened, eyes burning with hunger for their own glory. The skald rose, harp in hand, and sang of Odin's hall, of Valkyries bright, of warriors feasting eternal. His voice thundered, his words etched into memory, binding men with courage, women with pride, children with dreams. At dawn, the village gathered upon the shore. The ships stood ready, their sails furled, their oars resting, their prows glaring at horizon. Warriors strode forward, shields upon backs, axes at belts, their cloaks snapping in morning wind. They clasped hands with kin, pressed foreheads to wives, lifted children high one last time. Then they turned without word and stepped into boats. The chieftain stood tall at prow, his cloak of fur heavy, his helm gleaming. He raised his hand, and silence fell, spoke of honor, of fate, of gods who watched. His voice rolled across water, deep as thunder, steady as tide. Then he struck drum, its sound booming, and men seized oars. The first stroke bit water, oars rising and falling in unison. The drum beat again and again, steady, relentless. The ships slid from shore, their hulls cutting waves, their dragons leaping into mist. Women lifted arms, voices raised in farewell. Children shouted names, dogs barked. The shore fell behind. Smaller, dimmer, swallowed by distance. Out upon fjord, the wind caught. Sails unfurled, snapping loud, red and white squares filling sky. Ropes strained, timbers creaked, but ships surged forward, their speed swift, their power fierce. Spray lashed faces, hair whipped wild, and laughter rose. For the sea's embrace was thrill and terror both. The horizon stretched endless. Mountains fell away, cliffs grew faint, land slipped from sight. Only water remained, gray and rolling, its surface restless, its depths unknowable. The men rowed still, their muscles taut, their breath harsh yet steady. Sweat mingled with salt. Backs burned, but they did not falter. For to row was to defy sea, to command it, to prove strength. Storm clouds gathered, black upon horizon. Wind howled, waves rose, ships heaved. Oars snapped, sails strained, men cursed and prayed in same breath. Thunder cracked, lightning seared sky, rain lashed, ships pitched, prows plunged, water surged over sides. Men bailed with buckets, their arms frantic, their cries drowned in roar. Yet still they fought, teeth bared, eyes blazing, for to falter was to drown, and to drown with shame unless borne in battle. Then, as sudden as fury, storm passed. Clouds parted, sun blazed, sea calmed to rippling silver. Men gasped, laughed, shouted, lifting oars high in triumph. Their hearts swelled, for they had tested sea and endured. Each storm survived was proof of worth. Each voyage pressed further into Saga. Night fell upon endless water. Stars shone cold, their reflection dancing upon waves. The men lay upon benches, cloaks drawn tight, their breath steady. Some sang softly, old tunes of home, others whispered prayers, names of gods carried upon wind. The sea rocked them like cradle, yet beneath lull lurked dread. For no man knew what morning might bring, storm or sight of land rich for plunder. Thus the voyage began, as all voyages had, with sweat and storm, with laughter and fear, with song and silence. The sea had claimed them, and they had answered. And in their answering, the saga grew, another thread woven into endless cloth of blood, sea and story. The sea had carried them far, its waves rising and falling like the breath of giants, its winds sharp as axes, its silence deep as death. For days the ships pressed on, their sails swollen, their oars biting, their warriors bent to rhythm steady as a heartbeat. The horizon was endless, sky and water mingling, until at last a cry rose from the proud dashland. At first it was but a shadow, a smudge against dawn. Then cliffs grew, dark and jagged, their roots swallowed by surf. Beyond, fields spread, green and soft, dotted with huts, with grazing herds, with smoke rising gentle from hearths. Bells tolled faintly, their sound drifting over waves, calling folk to prayer. The warriors' eyes gleamed, their hands tightened upon axe shafts, their breath quickened. For before them lay prey, unknowing, unguarded, The ships gathered there, dragon heads snarling, their sails furled. Oars dipped, silent, swift, the vessels sliding toward shore like hunters upon prey. The tide bore them, waves foaming white against sand. Then, with sudden roar, prow struck beach. Warriors leapt, shields upon arms, axes raised, cries tearing sky. The village stirred in terror. A shepherd dropped his staff, his flock scattering. A woman screamed, clutching her child. Monks in a stone church raised their eyes from prayer, their voices faltering, their bells tolling faster, frantic. But the tide could not be halted. The north had come, and it came with fire. Warriors surged forward, their boots pounding earth, their shields locked, their axes rising and falling. Doors splintered, walls shattered, thatch blazed as torches flew. Smoke rose, thick and acrid. Mingling with cries of terror, men fell beneath blades, blood-soaking soil. Women shrieked, dragged from huts. Children fled, only to be seized, lifted screaming. Cattle bellowed, herds scattering, arrows piercing their flanks. The church stood. Last, its bells tolling, its doors barred. The monks within clutched crosses, their voices raised in desperate hymns. But timber cannot halt steel. The doors burst, iron hinges groaning, and warriors poured within. Candles toppled, books scattered, chalices seized. The altar itself was torn, its gold stripped, its relics cast down. The air filled with smoke, with incense, with blood. Monks fell, their chants choked, their bodies broken. The cross itself was carried away, silver gleaming red, in fire lineage tea. Outside, flames devoured the village. Roofs caved, beams toppled, smoke rolled heavenward. Warriors shouted, their voices fierce, their faces alight with frenzy. Some bore arm rings seized, others sacks heavy with coin, with silver, with cloth. Captives were bound, roped in lines, their eyes hollow with fear. The chieftain stood tall amid chaos, his axe dripping, his shield scarred. He raised his horn, blew long and low, its sound carrying above fire and cries. At once his men gathered, their work done. They dragged captives, loaded spoils, lashed beasts. The ships groaned as treasure and flesh were heaped aboard, their hulls heavy, their decks crowded. The villagers who survived knelt in ash, their homes gone, their kin slain, their lives shattered. They watched as dragons upon prows turned seaward. Once more, as oars bit water, as sails rose white against smoke-dark sky, their cries faded with distance, lost upon waves. Drowned by laughter of men who had come and gone like storm, the sea welcomed them back, its waves eager, its winds full. Behind them smoke rose, a black pillar against horizon, a mark of conquest. Before them stretched water vast and merciless, carrying them home with spoils and song. Upon the ships, voices rose. Men roared sagas of battle, boasting of foes felled, of gold seized, of women taken. They lifted horns of mead, though mead was scarce, pouring drops into sea in thanks to gods. They laughed, they sang, they struck shields with axes, their hearts swollen with pride. Yet beneath laughter lay shadow. For some benches lay empty, their warriors lost to blade or fire. Their bodies lay upon shore unburied, their souls already in Odin's hall, or wandering to hell's cold. Their kin stared at empty places, their songs faltering, their laughter bitter. For glory was never without grief, and plunder never without price. Night fell upon the ships, the sea black beneath stars. The captives wept softly, their ropes biting, their eyes staring hollow into dark. The warriors slept with axes in hand, their dreams filled with fire and blood. The chieftain alone remained wakeful, his gaze fixed upon horizon, his thoughts heavy. For though plunder filled holds, though silver weighed heavy, though song swelled, he knew storms yet waited, enemies yet watched, fate yet turned. The raid was victory, but victory was but a breath. Fleeting, fragile, bound always to fate's wheel. And so the ships sailed on, their dragons snarling, their sails swelling, their oars steady. Behind them lay ruin, before them lay sea. Within them lay Saga. For such was the raid blood and fire, triumph and grief, terror and glory, woven into story eternal. Sung upon lips of men, carried by waves, remembered by gods. The ships returned. To the fjord, heavy with spoils, their hulls deep in water, their dragon heads proud, their sails snapping sharp in wind. Behind them lay villages blackened by fire, churches stripped bare, monks and peasants scattered like chaff before storm. Before them now rose the mountains of home, sharp against sky, their peaks capped with snow eternal, their slopes clad in pine, dark as iron, the fjord spread wide, calm as mirror, its waters glittering with the pale gold of evening sun. Asterisk upon the shore the village gathered. Women stood in cloaks heavy with fur, their braids bound tight, their eyes searching for husbands, sons, brothers. Children pressed forward, their small hands shielding eyes from glare, voices shrill with excitement. Old men leaned upon staffs, their faces lined by winters without number, their gazes stern but proud. Dogs barked, running along water's edge, their cries rising above din. The ships struck sand, their keels grinding, their oars lifted in triumph.
Ow.
Warriors leaped into surf, their boots splashing foam, their laughter loud as thunder. They carried chests bound in iron, sacks heavy with silver, goblets gleaming, crosses torn from altars. They dragged captives, their eyes hollow, their hands bound. They drove cattle seized from foreign fields, their hooves striking stones, their cries filling air. The chieftain stepped forth, his cloak bright with foreign silk, his arm ring heavy with new silver. He raised his axe, its edge still scarred, its haft dark with blood. His voice boomed, naming the gods, thanking them for wind, for storm survived, for victory won. The people roared in answer, their cries echoing across water, rising to cliffs. Shaking ravens from trees, then began the feast. Fires were kindled high, their smoke mingling with salt of sea. Oxen were slaughtered, their throats cut, their blood spilling into bowls as offering. Meat was roasted upon spits, fat sizzling, scent drifting thick and rich. Fish smoked upon racks, bread baked in ovens, cheese cut, butter churned, mead poured golden into horns. The air grew heavy with food, with hunger, with joy. The warriors sat in longhouse, benches crowded, tables laden, shields hung upon walls, torches blazed, rafters thick with smoke. Mead horns passed from hand to hand, their rims wet with foam, their bodies carved with runes. Men drank deep, their laughter booming, their voices raised in boasts. One spoke of monk cut down, his cross seized, his chalice torn away. Another of maiden seized, her cries swallowed by fire. Another of foe who struck him, whose skull he split, whose blood stained his cloak. They boasted, they roared, they struck tables with fists, their words weaving glory. The skald rose then, his harp upon knee, his voice deep, his hair white as frost. Silence fell, for his song was greater than all. He sang of gods, of Odin's wisdom, of Thor's hammer, of Freya's tears. He sang of heroes, long dead, of Sigurd, the dragon slayer of Ragnar, who laughed in snake pit, of men who fell with swords in hand and were borne by Valkyrie's two halls of Valhalla. His words rolled like thunder, soared like eagle, wept like wind and pine. The warriors leaned close, their eyes alight, their hearts burning. For in his song they were not merely men, but heirs to Saga, their names bound to same cloth as gods. Women too joined, their voices soft, their songs weaving counterpoint. They sang of sons born, of husbands lost, of winters endured. Their songs were sorrow and joy entwined, their voices carrying pain unspoken, love unbroken. Children clapped hands, laughed, shouted, their faces bright with firelight, their eyes wide with wonder. The feast grew wild. Men wrestled in dirt, their bodies straining, their laughter fierce. Dice rattled upon boards, wagers shouted, curses thrown. Lovers slipped into shadows, their whispers lost in roar. Dogs gnawed bones beneath tables, cats prowled rafters. Mead spilled, torches flared, songs roared louder. Yet even in joy grief lingered. Empty benches stood where men had once sat. Their places were filled with silence, their horns untouched, their names spoken low. Mothers wept, wives keened, children stared, not understanding. Warriors bowed heads, their laughter faltering, their boasts softened. For each raid brought loss, and no feast was without shadow. The chieftain rose once more, his horn lifted high. He spoke of those fallen, naming them one by one, his voice steady, his gaze fierce. He promised their souls feasted now in Odin's hall, their bodies strong, their laughter eternal. He swore their names would not be forgotten, their deeds not left unsung. The skald took up song again, weaving names into verse, binding them to Saga, everlasting. The night deepened, stars shone cold above, fire roared bright below. The hall shook with song, with laughter, with grief and glory entwined. Warriors drank, women sang, children slept upon straw. The captives huddled in shadows, their eyes wide, their hearts broken, their fate sealed. Yet none heeded them, for this was night of triumph, of blood turned to song, of plunder turned to feast. Thus the raid ended, as all raids must not upon shore of enemy, but within hall of home, where spoils were shared, where songs were sung, where grief was swallowed in mead, where glory was carved into memory. The sea had given, the gods had granted, and the people rejoiced. For such was the way of the North, to take, to feast, to mourn, to sing, and in song. The saga lived on. The feast's embers smoldered long after the last horn was drained. And when dawn crept once more across the fjord, it found the village stirring not only with labor, but with the weight of kinship. For though axes and ships bound the Viking to glory, it was blood that bound him to life. Kin was shield, kin was sword, kin was root, sunk deep in soil, unyielding. No man walked alone. He walked in the shadow of ancestors, in the company of sons. Yet unborn, within the longhouse his family was fortress. The hearth burned at center, and around it gathered father, mother, children, thralls, and kin by marriage or oath. The father was head, his word law, his hand heavy in discipline. Yet his pride was measured not in silver, nor in axe alone, but in brood he raised. Sons bore his name, daughters carried his blood to new halls, and through them his saga stretched, beyond grave. Mothers ruled hearth with firmness equal to his hand, for while he waged war or plowed fields, she guarded house, managed stores, stitched clothes, healed wounds, and taught children the old songs. Her strength was quieter yet, no less fierce, and often it was she who kept clan unbroken when famine or feud struck. Children were treasure, fragile yet precious. From youngest age they learned their place. Boys wrestled, ran with dogs, learned to throw stones, then spears, then axes. Their play was training, their laughter prophecy. Girls watched mothers weave, learned to churn, to mend, to keep accounts of food and goods. They carried water, fed beasts, soothed infants. Childhood was brief, for winter allowed no idleness, and hunger taught sooner than words. Yet love lingered even in sternness, for fathers lifted children high upon shoulders, mothers sang lullabies. In tongues old as feared, and siblings clung together against cold and fear. Marriage was bond not of love alone, but of alliance. Fathers bargained for daughters, weighing dowry in silver and land in cattle. Suitors came bearing gifts, speaking of honor, of kin, of promise. Oaths were sworn, feasts held, torches lit, songs sung. The bride was led to New Hall, her hair unbound, her fate sealed. Yet though bargained, her strength was no less. A wife could manage wealth, demand divorce, reclaim dowry. She was not thrall, but partner, though bound within frame of law and clan. Kinship stretched beyond hearth into clan, into bonds of blood feud and oath. To harm one man was to harm all his kin. If a brother was slain, vengeance was duty. If your father was insulted, honor demanded answer. Feuds flared across valleys, axes ringing, halls burning, lives cut short. Yet feud was not chaos but law of balance, for without vengeance, shame spread like rot, and clan withered. To refuse feud was to declare weakness, to invite scorn, to court ruin. Still, not all feuds bled forever. Sometimes silver was weighed in scales, Wergold paid for life, for wound, for insult. A slain man's worth measured in coin, a broken bone in lesser sum, an eye in more. Thus peace was bought, grudging yet binding, and Saga moved forward without further blood. The law was harsh, but it was anchor, keeping chaos at bay with coin and oath alike. At Wing, the gathering of free men, disputes were judged. Beneath open sky, by stone and staff, men spoke, argued, swore. Elders listened, chieftains ruled, oaths were sworn upon arm rings. Sacred. To lie was to invite Odin's wrath, to break oath was to doom soul. Law was not parchment but memory, not scribe but scald, not ink but blood. Honor was breath of man. To live dishonored was worse than death. To die with honor was to live eternal in Saga. A warrior's courage, a father's word, a mother's chastity, a child's obedience, these were weights upon scale of fate. To lose them was to fall from memory, to vanish into shadow. Thus kinship bound all, gave strength, it demanded vengeance, it wove lives into tapestry tight and unyielding. It was solace and hunger, shield and feud, pride and feast. Grief and death, and in its bonds the Viking found meaning beyond plunder, beyond sea, beyond storm. For blood was Saga, and Saga was blood, and both endured when flesh was dust. The fire burned low in the longhouse, its embers glowing like eyes of beasts half slumbering. Smoke curled upward, heavy with scent of pine and fat, drifting through the hole in the roof into sky thick with stars. Warriors slept upon benches, cloaks drawn over shoulders, axes within reach. Children nestled against mothers, their small breaths rising and falling in rhythm of dream. Yet even in sleep the North did not grant peace, for dreams in that land were not mere wandering of mind, but whispers of fate, omens carried upon wings of night. A man stirred, his brow furrowed, his breath harsh, saw in dream a wolf vast as mountain, its jaws swallowing moon, its eyes red with flame. When he reached for his axe, but it melted in hand, turned to water, spilled into darkness, he woke with a cry, his heart pounding, his skin cold with sweat. Others turned, murmured, nodded, for they too had known such visions. They spoke low, their voices heavy. Fenrir stirs, Ragnarok draws near. The Volva, the seeress, was sought when dreams grew heavy. She came cloaked in black fur, her staff bound with bone and feather, her eyes deep pools where stars seemed to swim. She cast runes upon ground, carved from bone and stone, their shapes falling in patterns no man could read, but she, them, whispered, her breath misting and cold. Then she spoke, her voice trembling with power not her own. She told of storms to come, of kin betrayed, of kings falling, of winters without end. Men shuddered, women wept, for her words were not choice, but fate fixed, relentless, sharp as axe. The gods themselves had woven doom into the fabric of world. Odin, All-Father, saw it in runes, though he tore out his eye for wisdom. He knew end awaited, wolf and serpent rising, fire consuming, sky splitting. Thor would fall with serpent's venom burning his veins. Freya would weep, Heimdall's horn would sound, and all would burn. Men knew this. 4 skalds sang it by fires. Mothers whispered it in lullabies. Children played at Ragnarok in fields, their wooden swords clashing, their cries echoing doom. Fate was shadow always near, companion as constant as hunger, yet though they knew, end was certain. The Northmen did not despair. To fight, though doomed, was highest honor. To stand, though falling, was greatest courage. A warrior who faced death, with axe high, laughter on lips, was hero eternal. For though flesh rotted, memory endured, and Saga was stronger than stone, omens filled every corner. A raven circling thrice above hall was sign of battle near, fox crying at dusk foretold death of child. Dreams of blood upon snow meant kin would soon betray. Even the shifting of wind, the crack of ice, the howl of wolf in distant siege was read, each weighed, each bound to fate's web. No step was free, no choice untouched by thread already spun, and yet men still made oaths, still raised axes, still built ships. For though fate was fixed, glory was theirs to claim upon path. To die in bed, old and weak, was shame. To die with axe in hand was triumph. Thus they sought battle, embraced storm, courted death. For only by daring could they carve their name into Saga, and only Saga defied shadow of oblivion in long winter. Nights, when winds howled and snow buried doors, the skald sang of fate. His voice rose, deep and mournful, filling hall thick with smoke. He told of Yggdrasil, trembling, its roots gnawed by Nidhogg, its branches shaking with sorrow. He told of Loki, breaking free, of giants marching, of fire sweeping all. Children pressed close, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Women crossed themselves, men gripped axes even in dream. For though story was doom, it was also strength. To know end was near, was to live fiercely, to fight proudly, to love deeply. Thus, shadow of fate hung over every hearth, every hall, every heart. It was not enemy, but companion. Reminder that life was brief, that glory must be seized, that laughter must be loud, that Saga must be sung, and in shadow they lived, in shadow they fought, in shadow they dreamed. For Ragnarok would come, yet until it did, they were Vikings. Their story would blaze, bright against night, eternal against oblivion. The village lay hushed beneath sky, pale with winter light. Snow drifted upon roofs, softening their edges. Burying paths, cloaking forward in silence, smoke curled from hearths, thin and reluctant in still air. Ravens perched upon gables, their black wings folded, their eyes sharp, watching. Yet the people moved slowly, their cloaks drawn tight, their breaths misting white. Winter was not storm, but weight, pressing down with hunger and cold, testing each soul. Within the longhouse the fire burned fierce, logs crackling, flames clawing upward. Warriors gathered, their shadows long against timber walls, their voices low, for one among them lay upon furs, his breath shallow, his body broken by wound. He had fought in raid weeks past, his axe cleaving foes, his shield splintered, his body pierced. They had carried him home, his blood-soaking planks, his eyes still bright. But now his strength ebbed, his life slipping like sand through fingers. His kin surrounded him, wife with face lined by sorrow, sons with jaws clenched, daughters silent, brothers grim. The skald too was there, harp upon knee, his voice ready. For when warrior passed, his deeds must be sung, his name bound into Saga. No death was small. All were verse. The dying man stirred, his gaze lifting. His lips moved, voice rasping, yet strong. He spoke not of pain, but of battle of foe who struck him, of stroke that felled foe in turn, of laughter he gave, even as blood poured. He named gods, thanked them for strength, for storm, for song. His hand groped, found axe, gripped it weak yet firm. He smiled, teeth red, eyes burning with pride. Then his breath faltered, slowed, ceased. Silence fell. The wife wept, sons bowed. Brothers struck shields in salute. The skald's voice rose, trembling yet strong. He sang of warriors' deeds, of raids upon foreign shore, of storms endured, of foes slain, of laughter given to death. His words wove memory, binding man into cloth of Saga eternal. For though flesh cooled, name burned, and name was flame against night, the pyre was raised upon shore. Logs piled high, torches lit, fire roaring. They laid warrior upon it, axe upon chest, shield by side, cloak of fur around shoulders. His kin placed gifts, bread, mead, silver, even slave trembling with fear. They whispered prayers, they sang, they wept. Then torch was thrust, flames leapt, smoke billowed, sparks flew. The fire devoured, the body lifted and smoke toward sky. The people stood, their faces solemn, their eyes bright. For this was not end, but passage. Asterisk above, ravens circled. And in vision, whether of dream or faith or truth, Valkyries came. Maidens bright, their armor gleaming, their hair flowing, gold, their steeds swift. They lifted warrior's soul, bore him from pyre into sky. He laughed as he rose, his youth restored, his wounds gone, his strength fierce. He saw before him golden hall, roof thatched with shields, walls hung with spears, doors wide. Within, long tables groaned with feast, horns overflowed with mead, warriors roared with laughter. Odin sat upon high seat, one eye burning, ravens upon shoulders, wolves at feet. He welcomed the new arrival, his voice thunder, his smile grim yet proud. The warrior stepped forward, axe high, laughter upon lips, and took his place among the eternal. Back in village, life did not cease. The widow rose next dawn, her hands red with toil. The sons went to fields, their backs bent beneath plow. Daughters spun wool, their voices singing. The hall still rang with hammer, the forge still glowed, the fjord still heaved with tide. Death had come, yet life endured. For such was way of North, no single man, however brave, however strong, was greater than Saga of kin and clan. Children grew, their games fierce, their laughter loud. They swung wooden swords, raised wooden shields, fell laughing, rose grinning. They spoke of father lost, of uncle gone, of names sung. They vowed to avenge, to raid, to carve new verse. And so Saga wound onward, thread by thread, voice by voice. The skald sang still, his harp trembling, his voice deep. He told of gods, of Ragnarok looming, of fate unbreakable. He told of men who fought, though doomed, who laughed, though dying, who endured, though shadow grew. He told of kin, of blood, of bonds unbroken. His song rose, filled hall, drifted into night, mingled with wind, with snow, with stars. And so the saga did not end. For each death was verse, each birth new stanza, each raid new chorus. Blood spilled, yet blood endured. The sea took, yet sea gave. The gods doomed, yet gods blessed. Life was brief, but saga eternal. Thus the village upon ford, though nameless, two strangers, though small against world, lived forever in story. For its people were Vikings, and Vikings were Saga, and Saga was without end.